Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. It's time to talk markets. We're joined right now by Ted Seifried from Zaner Ag Hedge out of Chicago, Illinois. Hey, Ted, how are you doing?
Doing great, Sean. How are you today, buddy?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. Okay, so Ted, I think a lot of the market attention here, and boy, we've had some green on the screen as of late. A lot of attention on what's going on in the Black Sea. What do we make of this? How do we take the information that we're hearing and then apply that to what we see happening in the markets?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, we have to look at what the effects of the things that are happening over there mean for the markets overall, and what they mean for Ukraine shipping, and also what could potentially happen with Russian shipping, right? So obviously we came out of the gates really strong to start the week based on the fact that Russia had a drone attack on the port of Danube, which when we were looking at that on Friday, a lot of us were saying, hey, it's very unlikely that they're going to attack that port because it's the furthest west you can get in Ukraine on the Black Sea from Russia. It's far. Secondly, it's right on the border of Romania, which is a NATO country. And, Russia's got to be really careful about shooting anything real close to a NATO country, right? Because I would assume they don't want to escalate into that, right? But then they did Sunday night. So then, we really came out of the gate on Monday. Now, so the question is, what happens with that port of Danube? Because they've continue to be loading like that the last 2 days. Their ships still going out there. The real question is, are companies going to insure ships beyond what's already been sitting there waiting to get filled in? Whatever's already at port, are companies going to be sending ships in there after that? So that remains to be seen. Is Russia going to continue to attack it, or was that a point that they wanted to prove that they could get to it, but then now they leave it alone? So far, they've left it alone. There's not been follow-up attacks since Sunday night. So those are the two big questions. And then the broader scale questions are, okay, what does Ukraine do? Because if Ukraine starts to attack Russian grain vessels in the Black Sea or attack Russian ports, there's been a lot of talk about them taking out bridges that supply the ports. So they might not have to actually attack the ports themselves, but attacking the infrastructure to get to the ports. If that starts to happen, this becomes a war about grain specifically. And then we have to say, okay, this is a really big deal because you have your number one wheat exporter in the world in Russia, and your number three wheat exporter in the world in Ukraine, completely wiped out. That would be a big problem. So far it hasn't escalated to that. I'm not sure if it will. I wonder if the drone strike on Danube is the fever pitch of this whole thing or not. It seems like the market is starting to think that might be the case because there hasn't been any follow-up yet. And we have settled down since the big strength that we saw on Monday. But I don't know. It's such a wild card, Sean. We've done a lot of things in the last 5 years, trading pandemics, trading trade wars, trading, bird flu, just really anything we can throw at the markets. We've really done that. This is just another one of those things that it's sort of unprecedented. We really don't know how to deal with this and what to do. What I will say is there's a tremendous amount of risk in either direction. So there's definitely very specific ways that I think you should be playing this with limited risk strategies and things like that. And these are more complex than just, your traditional buy or sell, I think in most cases. So yeah, it's a wild world we live in, a lot of risk all over the place. And the way you approach it is going to be, very important to what happens going forward. Also,
yeah, I was just going to say, go ahead, Ted.
Big weather market in the meantime. So that kind of gets lost a little bit, and so, so much going on.
Yeah, we're dealing with a pretty significant drought in portions of the Western Canadian prairies. There's a lot of concern about what impact that's going to have for sure on canola production. But, in the case of, tying it to the Black Sea, what, spring wheat production is going to be in the Western Canadian prairies. I think we're comfortable, like we don't have all the right answers, but we're comfortable trading fundamentals. Mm-hmm. We're comfortable trading when, something happens and now it's like, hey, here's the impact. Trading military strategy is something kind of like it's all tied, but this is kind of a new territory, and I think you're right that the risk level in either direction is escalated. I think I've had emails from listeners and viewers this week saying, "Hey, I told you this is not going well. The market is going higher. I'm not selling anything."
Yeah.
That's a strategy, and hey, you may be right.
That is a strategy, but then also, I mean, go back and look in what did we do, at the end of June, where we just precipitously fell off, right? I mean, we had a $1.50 drop off the highs in corn, December corn, in that time frame. We could easily do that again. Corn's the one that I'm a bit more worried about than wheat, because
Oh,
the thing about
interesting.
corn, well, so the thing about corn and how it relates to the Ukraine is, their marketing season is the same as ours, right? So they're at the very tail end of their old crop marketing year, meaning their export season has pretty much run its course. There wasn't going to be a massive amount of corn scheduled for export between now and new crop harvest. So the grain corridor or lack thereof, that really impacts corn further down the line. More so, again, once that new crop is harvested and brought to ports and in position mid-October into November, that's when it will really hurt the corn market. And there could very well be another deal in place. You really wonder, personally, look, I'm not condoning anything Russia's doing, and I really think this whole thing is just a complete ridiculous thing. But what they're asking for, basically, Sean, is to allow for their exports of fertilizer. And it occurs to me that, go back to the end of the last calendar year, October of last year, we had fert prices darn near close to record highs. I don't know if it'd be terrible for the market as a whole to allow some of that Russian fertilizer to come out. Now, I get it. We don't want Russia having any more money than they have already. Sanctions are in place for a reason, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't seem to me like a big ask from Russia in order to keep that grain corridor open. And that's just me looking at this from an economic standpoint, not a taking sides or again, war strategy standpoint, anything like that. I just think that isn't a whole lot of concession to make to have that grain corridor continue to be open. So I don't know, maybe something like that happens between now and when the new crop corn export season starts in the Ukraine. I get the feeling China's going to want to push for something like that because China is the main beneficiary of the Ukrainian exports. To date, they've taken about 8 million metric tons of corn exports from the Ukraine. That's by far the most of any other country, and I think adds up to being more than all the other countries combined that have received Ukrainian corn. So China has a big interest in this, and China is really Russia's only major international friend, outside of the region. I would think that China might have a lot to say in it. So will Turkey. Again, things may get resolved at some point. You have to think. Russia was in this grain deal at one point. They're out, but you could get them back in. Even the rhetoric that you hear coming from the Kremlin is that we would go back into the grain deal if some of our asks are met. And again, I think if we allow them to export fert, I don't know if that'd be the worst thing in the world. So, we'll see.
Ted, you're not alone in that, though. And this really touches on, what's been happening in Canada, as Canada has really led this charge of saying no way to Russian fertilizer, putting tariffs at an incredibly untimely, right at the beginning of the conflict on that Russian fertilizer that Eastern Canada is heavily, heavily reliant on. That money, that tariff money that was collected never really returned to farmers. So, but to your point, though, there just is no political appetite coming from the Canadian federal government to switch that, because it'll be taken so much as like, oh, you're supporting, even you put out the preface before saying, listen, I'm not condoning. And so that's the issue, that politicians that have been so much on this narrative would have to backtrack and then try to reposition their strategy, and they've kind of made the bed now, and food prices, especially if we see this, really take off, it's going to have an impact. That may be the outcome we need for them to change their position on this, but that's going to take time.
Yeah, and the biggest problem here, Sean, is that the guys that are making these decisions, they don't really understand agriculture and markets, and like you said, high costs of food and things like that, and what causes that. They don't get it. So policy is being made by people that sit in offices. It's not being made by people that understand the markets that we are living in, and how that impacts everybody's daily life. So yeah, it's unfortunate. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some sort of resolution coming by the time we get to that new crop corn harvest. Because like I said, I think China is going to try to broker a deal between Russia, Ukraine, and possibly the West as well.
Okay, so let's hit on this weather. You mentioned the weather market. Let's hit on it. I mentioned the challenges in Western Canada. It's really, there all were parts, especially even in northern Saskatchewan, looking pretty decent in the spring. We have not had a lot of rain since. That production number continues to dip. The Midwest has had some of its challenges. Let's break down this weather market and how we should be interpreting it, and that's an added complexity on top of all the other things that are happening overseas.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is one of the more complex weather markets that we've seen in a few years. Last year was interesting with the late season dryness, but what was the hot and dry area? Look, this part of the Midwest didn't rain from April into the second or almost third week of June, right? And so we have a tremendous amount of had a tremendous amount of dryness. Soil deficit is we're not even coming back from it as quickly as we thought we would. The drought monitor is still concerning, although it has improved slightly. Crop conditions have improved slightly. We need a lot more follow-up rain, especially for corn right now in pollination. And for the most part, we're not really getting it, although I say that as it is absolutely storming outside my house right now. and temperatures are rather warm. So there is concern about corn. And in the meantime, that hot and dry area has shifted to you guys. Because like you said, you started out nice during the spring, but now that has really changed. It's going to be really interesting to see how we finish this out. I'm very curious to see how this corn crop makes it through. I think we've had some fairly timely rains to keep us from having the absolute disaster of a corn crop, like a 2012 type thing. Yeah. There are people that will argue with me about that. I'm going to go out on crop tour and find out in about 3 weeks. But it's a huge question mark. We always have questions about the crop, but I think this year, more than any that I can really remember in recent history. And then you have soybeans, that's the month of August, right? And so we look out into August, we see NOAA forecasts that are really very favorable for soybeans, but also we've seen a lot of favorable longer term forecasts that haven't come to fruition. So I don't think we really know what to do. What I will say is that extra 2.2 million acres of corn does give us a big cushion. We don't necessarily have to have a 177.5 national average yield. In fact, I don't even think we need to have a 172 in order to keep above a 2 billion bushel carryover. But for soybeans, losing 4 million acres below intentions, man, the margins are razor thin in soybeans. You really don't have a lot of downside play for that national average soybean yield, because if you do, you really have to cut out exports. And to cut out exports, well, how does that happen? That has to happen probably from price rationing. We've rallied $3 from the late May lows in soybeans. Maybe that's enough to price ration some exports. We're not seeing a huge amount of new crop exports come on the books quite yet. But I mean, the USDA is already looking for a lower export number from last year, or actually current marketing year. I don't know. Again, if you drop that soybean yield down to 50 or 49.5, man, we're going to be looking at potentially one of the tightest balance sheets that we've seen in the last few years. And that's, during this period of tight balance sheets and high prices. Yeah. And this could be the tightest one for soybeans. So that is a powder keg. It's very interesting. We can't really make any assumptions for the moment because, again, we need to see what happens with weather in August. But I also don't think soybeans are in the position to really break very hard at the moment, because we can't go out and entice new demand right now. We don't know if we have it. So I think soybeans have a fairly strong base underneath them between now and the end of August until we really do have a much better idea of what that yield's going to look like.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing from you correct me if I'm wrong, but soybeans have a very high floor.
For the moment, yes.
Okay.
Yes. For the next few weeks, at least until we need to know what the weather is in August. That's always the case for soybeans. But like I said, there's really no room for error this year.
Yeah, that 4 million acres being shaved off, that really was a Schoner grenade into a crowd. Like, it just really changed the dynamic.
Wow, yeah.
for sure.
Well, so two things there, right? I thought we would see more corn acres than what we had in intentions. I didn't think it would be that big of a shift. I didn't think we'd lose that many soybean acres. But think about it. Generally speaking, when we get off to a fast start of planting, we end up planting a little bit more corn, a little bit less soybeans. And that was certainly the case this year. But then also, we talked about fert prices, input costs. The guys who booked it in the fall paid really very high prices. But by the time we were getting ready to go in the spring, those in a lot of areas had dropped in half or maybe even a third of what we were paying back in October. So then you're sitting there thinking, well, I've got the window to continue planting corn. And if I book these inputs at much less prices, even if it's only another third of my overall production, I'm averaging down my average cost for the farm as a whole, and that makes my balance sheet look better. And I think that had a lot to do with why there was that shift towards corn and out of soybeans, I guess, to some extent.
Hey, Ted, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much. All the best to you, and let's go Bears, because training camp's open, and Jay Fields is going to have a great year, right, man?
Let's go Bears. He's going to have a fantastic year. We just got to block a little bit for him. He's super mobile. Yeah, get that arm going and get those legs going, and man, we might have the most dynamic offense out there this year.
Dude can run, but he's running for his life if you look at last year. Hey, Ted, thanks a lot. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, buddy. You too.